Hello, my name's Bridget and I'm the vicar of Good Shepherd and St Peter's, two of our local churches. I'm leading worship this week and we're thinking about the theme of wisdom. I wonder, if I ask you to think of someone who is wise, who do you think of? I decided I would do a quick Google search for wise people, and here is the list that Google came up with. First of all, the Chinese philosopher Confucius, Jesus Christ, Albert Einstein, the physicist Nobuo, Nelson Mandela, Karl Marx, and the philosopher Hegel. I note that they are all men, which probably says more about Google than it does about the capacity of women to be wise. Now, Jesus told a story about wisdom, and I suspect it's one you've heard before, but let me read it to you again. Jesus said, "Anyone who hears these words of mine and obeys them is like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain poured down, the rivers flooded over, and the wind blew hard against that house, but it did not fall, because it was built on rock. But anyone who hears these words of mine and does not obey them is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain poured down, the rivers flooded over, the wind blew hard against that house, and it fell. And what a terrible fall that was." You don't have to be a structural engineer to know that building on sand is not a solid foundation. If you ever visited the beach as a child, you probably discovered firsthand that if you build on sand, it's notoriously difficult, because at the end of the day, when the sea comes in, the castle that you've built is washed away. Now, what makes somebody wise is learning from that experience, building on the knowledge that they have so that they do things differently in the future. Maybe if you went back to the beach the next day, you wouldn't build in the same place. You wouldn't build your sandcastle quite so close to the sea because you knew from experience that the sea would wash it away. Now, often when we think about people who are wise, we tend to think of older men. But actually, I wonder if you consider yourself to be wise, because I rather suspect that most of you have your own kind of wisdom, built on experience and knowledge. Let me give you an example. Imagine for a moment that you are travelling on the bus. You go up and sit on the top deck. You're the only people sitting on the top deck. The bus stops. Some older teenagers get on. They come up the stairs and they sit immediately behind you in the seat behind you. And then they ask, "What kind of mobile phone have you got?" What do? I suspect most people will get straight up and go back downstairs towards the driver to get away from those people, because you probably had a sense that that wasn't quite so right. Let me give you another example. You've met up one evening with some friends. Your parents have told you what time you've got to be home, but you suddenly realise that if you go home on the main roads, you're going to be late. You've got a choice to make. Do you walk home down an alley that is incredibly dark by yourself just to make sure you get home on time, or do you stick with your friends and stick to the main roads, even though you're going to be late? Again, I hope that most of you would make the wise decision based on knowledge and experience to stick to the main roads and to stick with your friends. It's all well and good being a philosopher, and we do need philosophers, but actually I want to suggest there's a different kind of wisdom, and that wisdom is street wisdom. Because actually you've probably heard that phrase that we need to be streetwise. We need to understand, based on knowledge and experience, how to act if we're out at night, how to act when we're on the bus, how to act if it looks like some trouble is going to kick off, how to act when we're on the street, how to act when we're out in our local area. And I want to suggest that many of you have already begun to cultivate that street wisdom. And it's actually really important to be streetwise, to watch and learn and build on what you've seen. Now, Christian wisdom is knowing how God would act in a particular situation. Another way of thinking about it is to ask yourself the question, what would Jesus do if he was in my position right now? So let's think about that in terms of being streetwise. What would Jesus do if he was with a friend and that friend was really drunk? What would Jesus do if he felt tempted to nick something from Sainsbury's because he didn't have enough money in his pocket to buy what he wanted? What would Jesus do if he hadn't done his homework? What would Jesus do if something bad happened at home and he was really frightened? What would Jesus do if his friend said she was depressed and she didn't want to live anymore? God isn't just interested in what happens in church. God's interested in what happens in every part of life. What happens at school, what happens on the bus, what happens at home, what happens when you're walking to and from school. All of that stuff matters. Now, if your ambition in life is to be a philosopher, great. We need more philosophers, especially young philosophers. But actually, I think the wisdom we really need to develop is street wisdom, to be streetwise, to know how to navigate everyday life, so we know how to handle all of those tricky situations we found ourselves in. All of those examples I gave a moment ago, what would Jesus do in this situation and this situation, all of those come from real life, from my experience or the experience of people I know. Wisdom comes from building on knowledge and experience and learning from it so you act differently the next time. You're going to learn things in school that help you to be streetwise. Make sure you take them on board. You will learn things from each other about how to be streetwise. Make sure you take them on board. You will learn things from older brothers and sisters or cousins or friends who live in your area. Make sure you listen and learn from them. You will learn from neighbours and family and other people who are invested in your life. Take it on board. Learn from their experience, because let me tell you, there'll be people around you who have all learnt the hard way and they want to pass that wisdom on to you so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. Hear what they have to say, because that is where wisdom comes from. I hope that you can develop that special kind of street wisdom, because I think that is what we really need right now. Thanks for listening.